Let's
All
go.
right. So we're going to look at these four areas. So account executive self-sourcing, SDR and BDR performance, teams, attainment, all that kind of stuff. We're going to look at how the contact strategy is changing, and then also the role of sales enablement. So to kind of set the stage here, I just pulled some stats. This is pretty recent stuff. The current economic environment is impacting a lot of sales teams in very different ways. There's a lot of, I don't know what you two are seeing. There's a lot of companies actually hiring right now, surprisingly. And there's a lot of companies laying folks off. But bottom line is, I think there's a couple big things here. Attrition is a little bit higher than it was at the beginning of the year. Deal sizes are shrinking. Sales cycle lengths are increasing. And I think as a sales leader, especially, you still got to hit the same number, especially next year. And oftentimes people are doing it with fewer resources and fewer headcount. So when we start to think about how this impacts outbound, this is where I want to kind of open it up for you two here. What I've seen a trend of in the last 3, 4, 5 years is it getting harder and harder and harder to land meetings and buyers wanting less and less and less to talk to salespeople. 58% of sales meetings buyers don't feel are valuable and worth their time. I see that. I'm like, that sucks. So Katie, when you see this data, what sticks out to you? What are you seeing in terms of the reluctance of buyers to want to engage with sellers right now?
I mean, I look at it because if you think about what a buyer wants, interestingly enough, most salespeople sell a product they don't use. And that is where a lot of this comes from, is a buyer wants to know how, right? They want to know how to use the product and how it will impact them. And if you are selling a product that you don't actually use, there's already a how gap. And so that's where a lot of this value is lost, is because they're talking with someone who doesn't actually even use the product that they sell. And because of that, as a buyer, I'm like, well, where was the value in this? So you could do discovery on me. That's not valuable to me. So no, I see this and I believe it and I understand it. And I think it's why we're continuing to see a trend in, PLG and self-guided demos and all those types of things, is because people want to get into it faster.
Jason, I think part of the issue with that 58% stat, right, is I think about the last time that I ramped in a sales job and I was inundated with all this information about my product and I knew the types of discovery questions I should be asking. And I was thinking about, all right, how do I progress this sale? How do I show a great demo or have a great discovery call? And I think one of the big things most salespeople are missing, in the way that you can make sure that you don't fall into that 58% of unvaluable meetings, is every single time that you interact with a customer, you ask a question that sounds something like, how can I make sure that the next 27 minutes are a valuable use of your time? Now, that doesn't mean that you totally blow up your agenda and what you were going to do in that meeting and go down a detailed conversation around all of the IT requirements that you fulfill in the very first meeting that you have. But if you're not asking the customer, what do you want to make sure that we cover in this time together? You haven't really set an agenda. You've decided to monologue at that customer for 30 minutes, and they're not going to show up the next time. And they're going to burn the next salesperson that wants to meet with them. So ask your customer, how can I make sure this is a valuable use of your time?
Yeah, I think there's this trend also of the disconnect between the sales development org and the sales org, who are supposed to be rolling up into the same place, but the alignment around what they're trying to accomplish and the meetings they're setting and how a meeting is set up. I think there's just been a lot of buyers have been kind of tricked into taking a call and then immediately getting a demo from an account executive, or showing up and not getting the insight that the SDR promised. We'll talk about that here in a second. The first trend that I want to examine with you two is account executive self-sourcing. I have been on one with this year. There's a couple things that I have seen and a couple stats that I want to run through. There we go. So Bridge Group, this is from their 2021 report, and Sales Loft, this is from this year, actually, earlier this year. What you can see here highlighted in red is the amount of pipeline that account executives will typically self-source based on their deal size. And then what you see on the right is a comparison of a top performer versus an average performer. And when I see this, I don't know about you two, the amount of pipeline, especially with 75K and plus deals is insane. I'm just thinking, like, as an account executive, self-sourcing 61% of your pipeline is crazy. Like when you guys see these stats, does any of this surprise you based on your experience? Like, what sticks out to you?
So I guess we have slightly conflicting data though, right? Like one is showing 60%, another one's showing only 30% in terms of self-generated. Am I reading that right? Right. Bridge Group shows 50 to 100K is at about 29%. And then the Sales Loft is showing 60 to 40.
Yeah, they're weighting the top performers against the average performers. So we could still look at it. It shows, I think sample size is really important in who they're, asking these questions of course. But yeah, the data is conflicting for sure.
Yeah. So I think it doesn't necessarily surprise me, right? In terms of, hey, like the best of the best are going to be out there sourcing. Now, what we don't have here is how much of this actually turns to revenue, because I've also experienced this on my teams, right? When the AE is generating pipeline, well, that's already qualified. They can throw it into the bucket, right? It doesn't get caught as much. So it'd be interesting to see, the actual revenue that comes from this. So this trend doesn't surprise me. It was y'all's predictions that actually surprised me the most, that I'm excited to get into. So no, 30% sounds about right. 40% sounds about right. I'm just excited to talk about y'all's prediction and see where we land there.
Well, let's get into that. Let's get into that part. So Nick, what do you think is going to happen in 2023?
It's interesting. The prediction so one of the things that we all did in preparation for this session, folks, was Jason, Katie, and myself. We looked at some of this data and we made predictions about, all right, what is 2023 going to look like? And Jason and I both thought more AEs are going to have to put more time and effort into prospecting in order to hit their number. And Kevin, it sounds like your perspective is in the opposite direction, and I'm really curious to hear about it, actually.
Well, so think about what we've said so far. Outbound is getting harder or easier?
It's getting harder.
Getting harder, which means it requires more or less time to produce the same amount of number.
In theory, it should mean more.
But then both of your predictions were, okay, AEs are going to have to produce 60, 70% of their own pipeline. But then the recommendation was spending 90 minutes a day doing so.
Mm.
If all it took was 90 minutes a day to produce this amount of pipeline, we wouldn't be having pipeline issues. I think there's a drastic underestimation, that's a word, of how much time it takes to produce this amount of pipeline. And so if it's getting harder, it means even more time is going to have to be spent. And if even more time is going to have to be spent, how do you get an AE to produce 70% of their own pipeline on a regular basis if it's taking more and more time to produce it? So I'll pause there, and I'm ready for this conversation, because to me, I'm seeing it the opposite way.
Yeah. I got a pretty different take on this in terms of why. I think the outbound stats are very skewed because what we've seen in the last 5 years is this insane implementation of your sales lofts and your outreach and your sales engagement tools. And a lot of that's sent out by sales development teams that get very low results. I think from a skill level standpoint, at least in my sort of anecdotal experience working with folks, the account executives on the enterprise level, they tend to be more skilled at getting meetings with executives than the sales development teams are. Typically, that's usually what I will see on the enterprise level. I think the other thing too is my commentary is not really on what I think should happen. It's more what I think will happen. So I think that AEs should have more of the right type of support if that's a profitable function. The sales development function is profitable at that company. The thing that I see companies doing is just cutting hiring and then saying, hey, we only want to bring people in that are going to bring in actual pipeline that have experience. That's the trend that I see. I see a lot of companies hiring a lot of reps right now, but no SDRs. They're only hiring account executives. And we'll dig into the ratio of those two later, but that's my take on it.
Yeah. No, and I hear in that response too, there's also a difference between, in my opinion, of what should and what could happen. Right? Should AEs start producing more of their own pipeline? Absolutely, they should. The could is where I see the gap. right?
Yeah.
Because it's going to take more time and because a lot of AEs haven't necessarily been doing it that much. To step into that is where I see that blocker. So then as a leader, I have to make that decision, right? Y'all know my stance, POE, pipeline over everything, right? Yeah. Hiring more AEs does not necessarily generate more pipeline. Hiring more SDRs potentially can't. There's no silver bullet. And all of my teams have always been blended, always. AEs full cycle, SDRs supplement. But I'm seeing a lot of this of like, well, AEs are going to now have to go do, right? And the word here that's key is have to, because they stopped hiring SDRs. Now they're going to have to produce 60%, 70%, and they haven't done that for 2 years. I don't think that's going to play out the way people are hoping it will.
Yeah. Total skill standpoint here. So let's keep moving, because I think this is the other big thing. Katie, you had put in some notes about this. I've been talking about this a lot. I think what we're going to see a big trend with account executives is I think there's this idea that prospecting stops after the first meeting. Oh, we got the first meeting. And it's like a manager of something at this huge account. And you're like, that's not the person that you want to spend all of your time talking to, right? Especially as an account executive. And there's some interesting kind of data on this. UserGems has got a lot of data. Basically, what you're looking at here is the more people that are threaded into a sales cycle, typically the higher the win rate. The quality of who those people are, and obviously is a really big deal. But Gong's got data that supports this too. Closed won deals have more people involved than closed lost deals. And this is what I want to spend some time on right now. Only 7%, LinkedIn did a study, this is a couple of years old, 7% of deals are multi-threaded with more than 6 stakeholders, and 78% of reps are single-threaded on deals. I see this so much with account executives where they have one main point of contact who they call a champion, who's actually not a champion. The person has no influence in the org. They aren't able to engage the economic buyer, none of that kind of stuff. I think that this is the skill to master and to do it early. I'll go ahead and kick it over to you first, Nick. Multi-threading, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We just talked about the account executives prospecting with more skill. And if you think about what multi-threading actually is, part of it, you're using a lot of your same prospecting skills. And so I think if I'm looking at this data and I'm an AE and I think about, okay, how do I multi-thread more? There's a couple different things that you can start to do with your deals. One of the, like, I've been using LinkedIn a lot to multi-thread more. So if I meet with KD and he's a manager level, we have a good couple meetings, and I know Jason is one of his colleagues that I'm ultimately going to need to win over if we're going to get this deal. I'm foolish if I don't go connect with Jason and say in the message, hey, I just met with Kevin. We had a really great conversation about X. He's awesome. And I'm not saying, hey, will you come meet with me? Can we be involved in this deal? I just want Jason to know that I met with Kevin and I'm singing Kevin's praises. Jason's not going to be upset about that stuff. And so there's a lot of other things you should be doing. But I think, Kevin, you made an interesting point. Should you be dumping an extra 90 minutes into prospecting? Probably not. I don't think if you are just haphazardly prospecting or deciding, I'm going to get on LinkedIn and start multi-threading, I think you're missing one of the key things to be successful as a salesperson, which is anything that you should do should have a rhythm or a system attached to it. And so you should be systematically thinking about, how do I start to multi-thread, as opposed to just shooting a random LinkedIn DM here or there.
Katie?
Yeah, this one always surprises me. And I'd actually be curious from the people on here right now, like, why we don't do this more. Like, because right now we're talking about, like, this is whether it's an opportunity or reaching out, right? 7% of deals are multi-threaded. We know who gets involved in a deal. Like, we sell this full time. So we know who gets involved in a deal. So if I'm talking with a director of sales, I know finance is going to get involved in this deal. Why aren't we proactively going to that person? Right? Like, we know no matter what, that's going to occur. So this one's always kind of confused me a little bit, is we oftentimes actually even know better than our prospect who's going to get involved. We sell this all year. They buy it once. And so, in my opinion, we have to be very proactive here. And whether or not you get to talk to them, you should be creating buyer's guides. And so, what a buyer's guide is like this, right? Okay. If you know finance is going to get involved, you also know what questions finance is going to ask. So, give your champion that buyer's guide. Give this to your finance team. They're going to want to know the terms. They're going to want to know the ROI. They're going to want to know like the out clause. They're going to want to know cost of installment. Here is for your finance team. Oh, and your CEO is probably going to want to know this. So we created like buying guides of like, hey, these are the questions we know you're going to get from other people on your team. And we empower our champion or mobilizer with it. But this one, to me, it always surprises me because this is one where if we're just proactive, like if you go back to that gong stat there of like so often just recommending who should be on that next call will get them there. So Nick, love the call today, So normally the next step, we got to get your legal person and your ops person. Because if we don't get them now, let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to have to play back and forth over the next 3 to 4 weeks. You're going to have 5 additional meetings, and then it's going to stall out anyway. Let's get Nick and Jason on this next call so we can keep the progress going. When can we do so? Brilliant. We just have to suggest who should be there, and we should know that going into the call.
I love that so much because most buyers will follow the path of least resistance. And if you make the suggestion and say, hey, normally we're going to have to involve these couple people, the person will just say, yeah. And somebody put a question in the chat. I think it was Amy, where it's like, how do I do this without messing up the deal or making someone mad? Or what if they say no? And I think a lot of salespeople, they have those thoughts swirling in their head where if they make that suggestion that the buyer is going to push back really hard, and it will maybe happen 2% of the time. But all of your other deals, because you've made that suggestion or because you've offered the buyer's guide, it's actually a breath of fresh air for the other person. And to the point of the first stat we looked at about, is a meeting valuable or not? Well, now that's a valuable meeting because even if they don't buy your thing, maybe if they buy from a competitor, you don't want them to buy from the competitor, but you've helped the other person do their job better. They're like, Kevin's a good dude.
And what I'll touch on there though, too, we'll get into some psychology here, is the difference. You actually do this on purpose. It's called the big no to little yes. Yeah. The big no to little yes. If y'all haven't read Influenced by Robert Cialdini, go grab it, all-time classic. But he talks about this, where sometimes you actually want the big no because it makes the likelihood for the little yes higher. So it would sound like this. So normally these are next steps. We got to get Jason from legal and Nick from ops on here. When can we get them on? And they say, no, probably can't get them on. I got my big no. So it's my little yes. Okay, well, then I'll at least just CC them on the follow-up email. Is it Nick at Superbiz and Jason at Superbiz? You're going to get a yes to that significantly higher. Big no to little yes. This is just about being prepared, right? But then someone mentioned it, right? Of like going above and around. That's not what any of this is. The key to multi-threading is you actually have to have your champion sold. If they are sold, everything you're asking them to do is to help them get what they want. It's not about going around them. It's about to help them get what they want, right? And that's the key to this, is knowing who should get involved. Big no, little yes, but then keeping them updated. Because once I get that little yes, now I can keep them updated on the emails. I can send the recap video, all of it.
Nice.
Yep. I think the big thing, you guys nailed it there. The big thing is don't ask for permission to multi-thread. This is in educating the buyer on how the process works and letting them know what you're going to do and that you're going to keep them in the loop. Mm-hmm. The reason why we brought this up is, again, a reminder, prospecting, it doesn't stop once you get the first meeting, especially with these enterprise deals that a lot of you folks are working. You should be working strategically to get these other meetings. And that's going to require, like, I want to take the lead as the seller on that. I want to be the person to send the email to that person. I don't want to rely on them to talk about it internally. Like, I want to take the lead on it.
Right. Jason,
rolling.
One last point on that piece is, I think most salespeople on some regular cadence, they look at their list of their opportunities and they think about, how can I move this deal forward? And one of the things you should be thinking about when you look at your opportunity list is, what work can I put in today to better multi-thread in this deal? Is it going on LinkedIn and connecting with people? Is it sending an update to the executive buyer associated in the deal? Is it sending more information to my champion that they might share with finance or IT, et cetera? So add to your daily working of your opportunities the multi-threading element. What can you do to multi-thread better? And think about that regularly.
Absolutely. Let's dig into SDR and BDR performance. So a couple things I think that are super important to highlight here. Quota attainment. Some of this stuff. So this is like the most recent stuff that I could find. There's some stuff from 2021 that Pavilion did, but really kind of the thing that I see a trend with is that there's a lot of teams not hitting quota. And the number is going up on a yearly basis. And we'll talk about this here in a second. I just want to roll through the stats here. Ramp time is something that's pretty interesting, especially for sales development reps. And what you're looking at here that I thought was really interesting, we should spend some time on this one, is that ramp time for the most part is kind of hovered around that 3-month mark for SDR teams. And in inside sales data there on the left, the companies with the highest average attainment had a 1-month ramp time for their SDRs. And there's not a lot of like, okay, what was the average deal size and that kind of stuff going on. But I really think that ramp time, we got to figure out a way to get an SDR ramped faster. Like there's so many stuff that I'm curious kind of how you guys did at KD too. There's so many companies that I see where SDRs don't even pick up the phone and make a call for an entire month. Like they spend no time talking to prospects. They spend 3 weeks learning about the products that the company sells, which is just crazy. But I'll go ahead and kick this one your way first, KD. What are your thoughts on, ramp time in that sort of stuff and what we need to think about?
I think ramp time is a flawed metric. Okay. What does ramp time mean? Let's define this. Ramp time means what?
Well, ramp time would be how long does it take to hit quota?
Okay. But we just had the stat that showed 80% of them aren't hitting quota.
So I guess that means you're never ramped.
Thank you. I don't care about ramp time. I care about ramp success. Yeah. Right. So the fact that this line stays 3, generally when people are measuring ramp time, that means how long it takes for their quota to be full, right? Month 1 quota is 1, month 2 quota is this, month 3 quota is that. They're not tracking ramp success, right? I don't care about ramp time as much as how fast can I actually get them to succeed? We just had the stat that showed the vast majority aren't even getting to their quota, right? So ramp is not near. When I say ramp time, I mean, how fast am I actually getting them to full production, right? And am I ever getting them to full production, right? So Jason, my orgs fall into the bucket that it sounds like you don't like, which is fine. There's many ways to do this thing called sales. But my SDRs rarely were on the phone their first month. Rarely. You know why? Because they were spending that whole first month practicing that script. So by the time they hit the phones in month 2, they're actually ready, right? Yeah. They're actually ready to make those calls. And then my ramp success was 80% in 4 months, right? So my 80% of my SDRs were hitting or exceeding their number in 4 months, not just having a full quota. Compared to when I got them on the phones faster, my ramp success was lower. So that was my strategy, is I want to get them ready. And I don't believe an SDR is ready to make calls in 2 weeks. That's just my thought. That's how I've done it. That's how I've built teams. They can make calls. I just don't think they're ready yet. And I'd rather get them ready.
Nick?
Is this data only about BDR, SDR, or are we also talking about AEs here, Jason?
Yeah, we're digging into sales development teams right now.
I mean, my stance on it is, in order to succeed as a SDR, BDR, the probably 3 things that you need to know how to do is how to manage your time. How do you actually work a sales day and have a rhythm around the stuff that you do? How do you open the call? I advocate for a permission-based opener. Kevin, this is Nick Cegelski with ABC. I know you didn't expect me to call you right now. Can I take 1 minute? I'll tell you what this is about, and then you can tell me whether or not this is even relevant. And then how do you, in 1 or 2 sentences, pitch the problem that you solve and then ask the other person, would you like to learn more? And if you can do those three things, I actually think you will see a decent amount of success as a BDR, SDR. And so I think part of the problem is we are overcomplicating what it means to actually ramp. And we're either doing too much product training, or we're saying, oh, product training is not as important. We should be doing problem training. Or, well, problem training is not really important. We should be doing persona training. Really need to understand, what's the problem that you solve? Can you pick up the phone with some regular cadence? Can you sequence people with some regular cadence? And can you put the work in? And most people would rather do the ramping and the research and the prep and even the practice, which, don't get me wrong, that's extremely important, but they will drag all of that stuff out as an excuse to not do the hard thing, which is pick up the phone and call somebody, get punched in the face 99 times, and on the 100th dial, actually book a meeting.
Yeah. And that's where my onboard, I just got off a call with one of my clients last week. I look at all those things, and the thing that is hardest is having that conversation. That is all that first month is focused on.
Yep.
Is, can I get you ready to have that conversation? You knowing how to use sales after outreach does not matter if you can't have that conversation. You knowing how to find a lead in Salesforce does not matter if you don't know how to have that conversation. And that's where we're just drilling it in 3 to 4 hours of practice. And by the way, can you get punched in the mouth in practice?
Yeah.
You absolutely can.
Absolutely.
So these are not just layup practice sessions, right? This is really getting them drilled and ready for those moments, right? I think about the stuff that you teach, J-Bay. If someone had a full month of working on it, how good would they be by the end of that month?
Yeah, no, totally. Katie, quick question then for you, because the way that you onboard in that first 30 days is drastically different from how 99% of companies do it. If you had to give a quick insight into like the ratio of like the amount of time and the activities that someone might do, you mentioned practice as one of those. Like what would that look like if people are thinking about, how do we redesign our onboarding so that we can prepare reps versus just spending 99% of the time on products and stuff that they'll never even really talk about anyways?
Right, exactly. So my first month is built all around the conversation, right? And the problems that we solve, to Nick's point. And it's split 50-50. 50% of the time is learning, meaning absorption, whether that is classroom style, async style, watching training videos. And the other 50% is doing. They are legit practicing for 3 to 4 hours a day. Chunked. The intro, the objections, the common value points, the different personas, right? Like, it is high repetition every single day. So by the end, they can run 80% of the types of calls and 80% of the objections we run into, like sharp. Then we get into product training. Then we get into process training. But the foundation, 50% learning, right? So learning psychology, learning the script, learning the prospect, learning the personas, 50% doing. Afternoon, 3 to 4 hours per day, practice repetition with each other, peers, manager, and enable.
Love it. Let's keep rolling. I can already tell we're not going to get through all the content. Let's spend some time on this. SDR to AE ratio. And again, there's kind of some stats varying across the board. It's consistent-ish. A lot of companies, I don't know, for whatever reason, a lot of the companies I work with, it's like a 1-to-4 ratio most of the time, where I'm like, poor SDR, dude. Like, you're working with like four or five different account executives. All of them are giving you conflicting information on what they want you to do. And there's a culture where the AE is the SDR's boss, which I just cannot stand. It's like you have the blind leading the blind, so to speak, when it comes to this kind of thing. And there isn't like alignment. It is someone just telling the SDR what to do, and they aren't really getting any support. But my prediction for this is, and again, it's the same answer as before, I think the AEs will have less SDR support. I don't think that that's a good thing. I just think that's what companies are going to do. But where do you guys see, we'll kick this over to you, Nick, first. Like, what are your thoughts, on this, and where do you kind of see this heading in terms of how companies think about the number of SDRs to AEs and that sort of thing?
I don't know. It's tough for me to give a commentary on it because the perspective that I am having with all of this data is, what can I control? And so I'm thinking less about, all right, what's going to happen? And I'm more thinking about, okay, if I have less SDR support as an AE, what does that mean that I need to do personally? And so I look at this and I'm like, I see the data, I feel the data, but I'm like, I don't know, I've trained my head so much to think about what's my circle of control? What's my circle of control? And looking at this can be scary to sometimes to say, all right, if I've been dependent upon 2 SDRs and now I don't have those people, how am I going to make sure that I keep my calendar full? And so that's where my head immediately goes.
80.
I don't know if that was not what you were looking for, but it's where my head is.
It obviously there's all these things like depend on your company and your deal size and all those types of things. But like to your point, Jason, when I hear 1 to 4, it makes me go like, okay, well then how much support is that AE getting anyway? Right? Yeah. If that SDR is booking even 20 demos a month, which for a lot of outbound would be very high, those AEs are only getting 5 opportunities, right? Like each, and at a close rate, they're literally only getting 1 deal from that SDR, right? Pipeline is the problem for most companies, right? So I see a lot of people actually are dropping this in the chat. And I mentioned this, I saw your post today. Like if I were stepping back into the game, for me, it actually would be the opposite. I would want the best closers, my best closers, filled with opportunities from SDRs. And so I'd look at it the other way because an AE is expensive as well. And I think that's also like now we're asking a 175K, 200K per year person to also source 6 to 7 opportunities per month. That's more expensive than, all right, how much would it cost for an SDR to produce those? So this one surprised me to still see that as the ratio for most companies. I would flip it for my org because it actually is more cost efficient and more predictable than if it's just a 1 to 4 and all those are out there.
If you had to spitball, because there isn't really any data that I could find on this, Katie, in your experience, what percentage of sales orgs actually have a sales development function that works for the company? I'm talking like the deals actually close. It's a profitable function because a lot of companies, it's just like they hire a shit ton of people and that function of the company doesn't really generate a ton of pipeline and it isn't profitable for them. Like if you just had to kind of spitball, how many companies is that actually a smart decision to do, to say, let's double down on sales development?
Ooh, I don't know how to give a percentage. The math is actually relatively easy, right? So something that people often say with sales dev is they say, well, the deal size has to be above 10K to make sales dev work, which is actually, that's not true. It's not the deal size. To your point, it's the production. Because if the deal size is 5K, but my SDRs are booking 30 meetings a month, that works, right? So that's more so what it comes down to is how many can they produce and then at what rate do those close? And now you have to run your cost of acquisition numbers to see like, does this make sense to do, right? So I don't know what percentage of companies, I would say within SaaS, probably 70-ish% of companies have sales dev roles within their company. Now, what percentage of them are working? Well, I think we just saw that data. Right. Yeah. Like if less than 80% are getting to quota, then it would appear
it's like
a lot of them aren't working.
I do the math. If you know when you were at Patient Pop, it's like, dude, if you could say 80% of the time within 4 months, this person's going to get to quota. That's like, you could scale an entire org like you did out of that. That's just not the case for a lot of these orgs, you know?
And that's where, like, again, everyone has focused on scale. They haven't focused on success. While there's companies over here trying to figure out how to speed up, ramp, and get people on, I'm keeping my people off the phones for a month so I actually get them good, right? Yeah. And then to these ratios, so my AEs, they were full cycle too. They always did prospect. But in order to get SDR support, they had to meet their self-supported number. Yeah. So if you were not hitting your self-supported number, you didn't get SDR support.
Yeah,
you had to do your part to continue to get the support. And if not, that support got taken. And guess what number didn't change? Your quota didn't go down.
Yeah.
Right. So you had to do your part. You missed self-supported for 2 months. Your SDR support would get throttled. You got back to it. SDR support comes back.
Oh, dude, I love that. That is a really, really good takeaway. Let's keep rolling, fellas. So third trend, we're definitely going to have some thoughts and opinions and spend some time in this area. So shifts in the contact strategy. So what's the state of cold calling, cold email? What's been going well? What hasn't? What are we going to need to change? And sorry, there's like a little delay for me. So I've been having to flip back and forth just to see the slide for some reason.
We forgive you, Jason. We forgive you.
It keeps doing this little lag thing. I always like to bring up this stat. This is from Aircall and Bluebirds. This is from this year, I believe. 80% of buyers have the feeling that they're called by salespeople who don't know who they are, what their company does, or the context they're in. And I think this is really kind of the big thing that when I'm working with reps and teaching them how to cold call, it's like, this is the thing that you're competing against. So you need to demonstrate credibility and business acumen and that you know who the person is and that you know about their situation, like in the first 30 seconds. Like that is a must. And if we start to go into this is where I want to have some talking points first. This is fairly consistent with what I've seen. On the left there, 1.48% chance of a positive outcome from a cold call. Usually I see that more around 3 to 5% at SalesOrgs. And then I do see some of the best in class cold callers, 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 4 connects, they're getting a qualified meeting from. What I want to ask you two about, and I'll kick this question your way first, KD, what is the difference between someone that performs at a very average level versus just the killers that you've seen on the phone where they're just like, 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 4. It's like the phone is a very productive medium for them.
It's tonality. It's the questions they ask and connecting the dots. It's those 3 things, right? One, how do they sound? How do they sound? Right? Like it's always hilarious, right? Because salespeople, we hate scripts, right? We hate scripts because, scripts make us sound robotic. And it's like, no, script doesn't sound anything. Person sounds robotic, right? So like we have to work on that tone. How do we sound? The second, then the questions they ask. And this is how you prove right? Your space is based off the questions you ask, right? If you ask someone, right? What are your goals for 2023? Is someone ready to do this with a VP, with a C-level person in 2 weeks and 5 days of just reading off the script? This is what we're drilling. This is what that repetition is all about, to get them ready for this so that when we flip over to that next slide, right? My average conversion rate on conversation was 20 to 25%. My best were in the 35 to 40% range.
Dang. Across your org, 20 to 25%. That's insane. Like, again, it's like when you think of scale, that's why you guys scaled so much and so fast, because you had something that worked that you could replicate, And
it's because it focuses on skills, right? Like it's skill focused, not scale focused. It's skill focused, not speed focused. It's skill focused. Make your people better, and all these numbers change. All these numbers change, right? So that's the key to it.
Nick, what about you? What do you feel like is the biggest difference for someone that really crushes it on the phones versus someone that's just beating their head against the wall every time they get a prospect on?
I mean, it's really interesting to look at this data and look at the delta between the masses, the chance of a positive outcome, the Gong data, and then the people who are really, really good. And I think a lot of salespeople are going to they'll look at the Gong stat and they say, wow, that's such a low positive outcome. It's not worth cold calling. When in reality, Kevin just talked about it. Like if you nail a couple great things, you'll be able to use the phone as a predictable channel to book meetings. I think the 3 things, or the couple things you got to nail to be a great cold caller. Kevin, you talked about the tone. The other piece is sort of the timing also. Like sometimes when you're cold calling, there can be like sort of awkward, stilted timing where like the call sort of connects and they're like, hello, hello. And you've got to be attuned to how to navigate that sort of like jerky entrance into a cold call. And the only way that you do that is you make a bunch of cold calls and you practice. But if you get discouraged by that 1.48%, you don't make enough cold calls and you never get good there. And then from there, like, I think you have to nail a couple things to get the other person to listen to you as opposed to just hear what you're saying. Hearing is a physical thing. Like I hear the cars on the street outside right there right now, but I'm not listening to them. And so I think you do that with some variant of a permission-based opener where you weave in something you know about them. I think you do that by asking a question that can be sort of canned and tailored to the industry or persona. You don't have to like have a custom question for every individual CFO that you're calling that day. But if you can do a couple of those things, you totally stand out than the people who just, they close their eyes and they hope, or they don't make the calls at all. And they log them in Salesforce and say, oh, I made my cold calls. They didn't work. No one's checking.
Yeah, those questions, the way I call it question stacking, what you did, KD, where it's the questions stacked with some sort of insight, some sort of context, something that you're hearing in the industry. And when you just hear someone say, hey, and speaking with other VPs of sales, I'm hearing this thing, and it's like, boom, you nail it, you have immediate credibility. Right. You're no longer an SDR or a BDR or an account executive or salesperson. You sound more consultative. And that's really what it's all about with this. Let's keep going. So voicemails. I've been hammering this year because people are like, voicemails don't work. I'm like, when did you ever get callbacks? Seriously, like when did you ever get more than 5 or 10% of people to call you back? No one is that good at leaving a voicemail. Orem pulled a bunch of data. I think this is across 1.5 million calls. It was right in December in 2021. And what they found is that the subsequent pickup rates tend to be higher when you leave a voicemail. And I think the what to say in the voicemail, I think both of you guys talk about this, but what I typically teach is don't ask for a call back in the voicemail, like direct them on something else to do that's much lower friction. So it's, hey, Nick, no need to call me back. I just sent you an email and the subject line is XYZ. Go ahead and check that out. Or I saw this initiative, this thing that you're doing. Typically when people are doing that, they're thinking about this, and like make the subject line short, sweet, snappy, and give an example of what that subject line is going to be and point them to do something else. But what are your guys' takes? What are your hot takes on voicemail? Should we leave them? Do they work? Are people using them incorrectly? What do we think?
Yes, you should be doing it. Yes, you should be pointing to an email or to a LinkedIn message. And yes, you should be thinking about it as a text message because more and more people are just reading their voicemails, not listening. Right. It's shocking to me how many people don't leave voicemails. And I say, if you call someone and don't leave a voicemail, did anything happen? Like literally nothing happened. You did zero anything to progress that person to becoming closer to having a conversation with you. Zero progress has occurred. That voicemail is a free radio ad. Right? It's a free radio ad. I'm like, hey, look for this. And that's it. Right. Like, and should you leave a voicemail on everyone? Not every, but at least 3 to 4 voicemails across a sequence. Yeah. Right. Because that first one, right? Like, it's just hilarious to me. You wouldn't send one email and be done, but just one voicemail. Like, same thing. Right? Leave the voicemail, direct them to something else you want them to do. That's what leads to success.
I would argue that voicemail has the highest open rate too. There's conflicting data on this too, but it's like 9 out of 10-ish voicemails at least get clicked on or transcribed and sent. That doesn't mean they're going to listen to the entire thing. But dude, that's a way higher opportunity than an email.
It's a free radio ad. That's what always blows my mind is like there is no there's nothing blocking at that point. And if it is short and sweet, hey, Jason, shot you over an email. Subject line is just left you a voicemail. Take a look at that. Let me know your thoughts. KD from Outbound Squad.
Yep.
That's it. Right. This is also why I joke about these things, the pre-recorded. I always laugh about the pre-recorded because is it that hard? Like, is it that hard just to leave a regular voicemail using their name? Like it's 10 seconds. It isn't saving me anything. Like at least let me use their name and something about them. That's it.
Eric put in the chat, he said, if you mess up, just hit the pound sign and restart. There's no pressure, which is great. I've done that before if I really botched it. But like, if you screw up a little bit, like laugh it off and keep it going. If anything, you stand out more than all of the other crap voicemails. Jason, I got a call the other day from one of my best friends. He called me. It was like 6 o'clock. This was Monday night. He didn't leave a voicemail and he didn't text me. So I didn't respond. I assumed it wasn't important. And then a couple days later, it came into my head. I was like, oh, my buddy called me. And so I texted him. I was like, hey, you called me. Like, I think we missed each other. And he hasn't replied to me yet. And so it probably wasn't important. And I feel like the same, like I get all of these spam calls now, and I still look at every single voicemail transcription because I don't want to miss something. So yeah, leave the voicemail. If you screw up, lean into it a little bit. I think there is a diminishing return. It's going to be weird if you leave 47 voicemails for Jason Bay. Eventually he's going to be like, dude, what the F? And like, I think you sort of crossed a line there, but leave them and direct to another channel.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep moving, fellas. We got about 10 minutes left. I think the connect rate one is pretty interesting. So there's a couple stats that I want to share. This is from Tito over at Alti Sales. They analyzed at the end of 2021 over 500,000 cold calls. And they found that the connect rate roughly on the calls they make is around 4.4 to 4.57%, somewhere around there. The other thing that they found that I thought was kind of interesting from Orem, because I always get asked about local presence, right? Dialing from a local area code or a number that really closely matches. And the conclusion that I always hear is that people think it works way better than it actually does. In Orem, they did a test. You can see it here on the screen. And what they found when they did it is that the connect rate was actually lower when people called from local numbers. I don't know why that is, but I'm kind of curious for you guys. Connect rates, this is like the big thing with cold calling right now, is like connect rates, they seem to be getting lower and lower and lower every year. What are your guys' thoughts on connect rates and kind of the game that we play to get people to pick up the phone?
Yeah, I mean, this is the reality. And what's, I'd say, unfortunate about this is people don't use this math to call it their advantage or to their strategy, right? Yeah. Okay, connect rates, call it 5%. Well, that means I have to make at least 20 calls to talk to one person. Well, we have a lot of SDR teams out there, and this is back full circle on why I don't know that AEs can do that much value here, is if connect rates are 5%, that means to talk to 3 people, they got to be making 60 calls a day just to talk to 3, not to convert 3, just to talk to 3. Do they have the time and capacity to make that many calls, right? So it's making sure that you use this number to actually establish how many dials do I actually need to make to get there. But then also, most connect rate issues, in my opinion and experience, are actually channel issues. You know what improves connect rate? Great emails. You know what improves connect rate? Great social messages. You know what improves connect rate? Direct mail. You know what improves connect rate? Video. So oftentimes, if I'm having a connect rate issue, I'm looking at how am I doing in the other channels, right? And whether or not there's ways I can lift those types of things. But yeah, this is the reality right now. And that's why the conversation conversion rate is so important. It's so important, right? Back to that 30% mark. If I get 10 people on, I got to get at least 3 of them to say yes to a meeting. Because if you are at 5% and less than 10%, you actually cannot succeed in outbound. You actually can't do enough activity. If you are at a 5% or below or connect rate and a 10% or below or conversation conversion rate, you can't do enough activity to get to your numbers. And at that point, you're kind of stuck. So yeah, this is the reality. This is it. The activity levels have to continue to go up to make it happen.
Yeah, the phone is becoming a game where only elite prospectors can really make it work because the connect rate's so low. Nick, I'm going to ask for your take on this just because I'm looking at time. Show rates.
Yep.
And then we got to find a way to squeeze in some stuff on email too.
Yep.
Show rate, and Katie, feel free to comment on this too, because it sounds like you've talked to Tito through this, but I think all of this stuff just is so much more important because we're getting so fewer at-bats. But being able to set up a follow-up call or that meeting within 5 days is really the game. Within 3 business days is what I always suggest. If I can do it same day or next day, depending on the type of person that I'm talking to, that's ideal. But Nick, what's your kind of take on show rates and what people need to be thinking about to get prospects to show up these meetings that we work so hard to get in the first place?
Well, this says the sooner you set the meeting, the better, which would make sense to me. You've got somebody on the phone. They're relatively interested in your thing or learning about your thing. So schedule the meeting for later that afternoon or the next day. I don't think you want to have a discovery call on the cold call right there because you and the prospect both should show up prepared and focused for the interaction. So I think the best practice would be to book as soon as possible. And then to keep the show rate high, do stuff in advance of the meeting to continue to reinforce that this is going to be a valuable use of your time. And if you do that and you show that you're putting in the effort, the other person will reciprocate and they will respond in kind by actually showing up. So that might include re-prospecting them almost, where it's like, hey, I'm really looking forward to meeting with you on Thursday. By the way, I just watched this interview with you on YouTube. I'll see you at 2:00 on Thursday, right? And all I'm doing is I'm showing I am prepped for this. This isn't just a generic meeting. I'm a real person who is continuing to learn more about you, your business, your thing. And if you're not going to show up, at least tell me. Don't no-show me, right? I don't think you're going to get no-showed if you continue to prospect them.
Yeah. I think a couple other little tips too is like, do you send an email over like to confirm the meeting and what's in the agenda and the calendar invite and all that kind of stuff? Like how are you getting the person excited? One thing that we'll always do when we set a meeting is like, hey, one of the things we're going to talk about is how other companies like Gong and Medallia are tackling this challenge that we talked about over the phone in 2023. It's like people want insights, especially executives.
Well, you're selling the meeting again. You keep selling the meeting. You keep reiterating why this will be a valuable. And what you just described, yes, people want those insights, but they also want all sorts of other things. And so you just keep reiterating why they should show up.
Yeah.
So quick counterpoint for everybody on here is this data accurate, but what's not on here is the book rate. So what do you think happens when you ask for a meeting 2 weeks out? The likelihood of the yes goes up. Because like, we forget this, y'all. Bae, what's the chance I could get a meeting with you tomorrow? Like, and we're friends. At least I think we're still friends. What's the chance I could get a meeting tomorrow?
Well, I'll make exceptions for certain types of people that I want to collaborate with that are value. But it'd be hard to get on my schedule for tomorrow. It's slammed.
And we're friends. So what this leads to is this is oftentimes where I hear SDRs have someone right there ask for the meeting for tomorrow. They can't get it. And this is where the trance gets broken and it turns into, well, actually, you know what? Why don't you send me an email?
Yeah.
Right. So what we tested is the show rate for us past 7 days went from 80% to 70%, right? Which is about a 15% drop. Our book rate went from 20% to 32%, which is almost a 45% increase. So although there's a drop in show, the amount of meetings we were able to book went up. And then we focus so much on what Nick said about how to make sure they show. Think about your prospect's world for a second. This is a place where we put ourselves ahead of our prospect, where we're asking for a meeting tomorrow. Good luck. Whereas asking for a meeting next week. So we actually taught this. We'd ask for the meeting tomorrow if we heard any hesitation, like meaning a pause, a thought. Actually, I'm sure tomorrow's booked. How does next Friday look?
Great.
Because the odds I can get on your calendar next Friday, 2 times higher. So just something to remember with this data, y'all.
I love that because you're sort of using the big no, little yes sort of thing, right?
Right. They're already saying no. They're already be like, tomorrow's pretty. I'm sorry. I'm sure you're stacked. How's next Friday look?
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Actually, that's way better. Awesome. Now I've got my yes. And then I can do the things necessary to get them to show up. And it paid off massively.
Yeah, that's money. Okay, we got like 2 minutes left, you guys. Let's just get some hot takes on cold email. Couple stats here I thought were interesting. Lavender had some data around the highest performing cold emails being 25 to 50 words. And we have some stuff. I'm so sorry, you guys, for all this bouncing around. My computer's like kind of wigging out on this. Let me just stop sharing my screen. So the 25 to 50 words in terms of length. And then the other thing, too, that was kind of interesting is the average person spends about 10 and a half seconds looking at an email that they open. And what I would love from each of you guys, just like a hot take on cold email, like where do you see it going? What do you see people needing to change? What do you see not working? What's a hot take you guys have on cold email to succeed in 2023?
I'll just do a fast one on this. I only got like a minute. Are your emails even getting into the inbox? Like deliverability is, I think it's starting to bubble up a little bit, but I don't think people talk about it enough. Are your emails even getting in? The gateds of the world, the spam blockers of the world are making it so much harder. You got to make sure your domains are strong. You got to make sure that you're not just going to spam all day long.
Yeah. Nick?
Great point. My favorite quote related to cold email is, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Yes. Mark Twain. Twain.
Yeah, it's a tribute. I don't know if he actually, and my recommendation would be, I think too many people are starting all of their personalization from scratch. And so what I would do is there's probably common routes that you take when you're personalizing your emails. And so figure out what some of those common routes are, or transitions that you make from personalization to your thing, and create some templates that you can lean on so that you're not starting from scratch every single time.
Love it. We got to run, you guys. I appreciate Katie, Nick, you too. This is awesome. We got to do maybe a part 2 where we can do a deeper dive into some of the other stuff. And then everyone in the audience here, love the engagement. We'll send out an email to you afterwards with the deck, recording, all of that kind of stuff. And that's all we got. We'll see you.
See you all later. Cheers.
Later.